Venusaur is fundamentally the best starter in Kanto. Bulbasaur beats the first 3 gyms easily, and by the time you get to Erica, you'll have already caught several Pokemon that can beat grass types. It also beats half of Giovanni's team, switches into most of Bruno, and beats half of Champion Blue's team. At the start of the game, Bulbasaur also cannot faint to poison outside of battle due to its starter unique poison typing. This may not seem like much, but remember that Viridian Forest has trainers and Wildmons consisting of Weedles and Kakunas, usually going for Poison Sting. Finally, brief mention to X and Y, where while not as impressive as in Gen 3, it is a free Mega Evolution for you that checks Lysander's Gyarados, most of Drasna, and Seabold. Altogether, it is a solid Pokemon that I highly recommend, especially for Kanto runs. I would not recommend picking Charmander as your starter for Kanto runs. It struggles against the first 2 gyms and doesn't do much better against the third. By Erica, you already have several Pokemon that can beat her team. After that, you fight Koga, who has half a team that explodes. Due to Fire being a special type, Muk's special defense makes it a solid check to even Charizard. Realistically, the only Pokemon that Charizard can reliably beat are Giovanni's Mons that aren't Rhyhorn, and Blue's Executor in the champion fight. On the bright side, depending on which game you are playing, Charizard's Mega Evolution will carry you in X and Y, especially Zard X, beating 3 of the Kalos gyms, while also reliably beating Wikstrom, some of Drasna, and half of Diantha. Ultimately, don't pick Charizard in Kanto, but I'd recommend it in Kalos. I'm on the fence about Blastoise, but I'd have to say it's okay. While Squirtle beats Brock easily and has access to Bite from Misty, Gyms 3 and 4 keep it away from being used there. By the time you get to Blaine, you'll have certainly caught several water types to add to your box. The biggest reason I argue against picking Squirtle as your starter is the existence of the free Magikarp that evolves into Gyarados, who you can get before Gym 2. Blastoise weirdly does have a niche in Kanto's endgame, beating Giovanni reliably while also checking Bruno and most of Lance's team if you teach it Ice Beam. Checking half of Blue's champion team at the end isn't too shabby either. In X and Y, Blastoise, Mega or not, is also very mixed, as it does beat Grant as a Wartortle, and isn't too useful otherwise until the late game, where it checks most of the Elite Four, including half of Diantha's team. Overall, Blastoise is pretty average. Not entirely sure if I would recommend it for Kanto, but it's not a bad choice in Kalos. Obviously, Salamence is a fantastic Pokemon. Great offensive typing, incredible ability in Intimidate, and access to good attacks from level up and TMs. But I think it's overrated, as not a single game from Gen 3 to Gen 7 allows Mence to normally learn Dragon Dance, its best move, though there is a common misconception that it can.
Salamence, I think it should be banned. Intimidate plus Dragon Dance plus Insane Typing.
You also usually evolve Bagon around the endgame, when admittingly is when it performs best. In Gen 3, it can beat Sydney and Steven while serving as a last-ditch check to Drake. In X and Y, it can defeat all but Seabold of the Elite Four. In Gen 7, it can beat most of the Elite Four again, but will struggle against Olivia and both champion teams. By Gen 8 and onward, I would ban it because of TRs and TMs giving Mence access to Dragon Dance. As for Mega Mence, yeah, that's banned in my runs. Overall, Salamence is great, but it's not amazing like everyone praises it to be without Dragon Dance. But don't be dissuaded from picking it for your team. Let me know which Pokemon you'd like to see evaluated for Nuzlocke viability. While Marowak has great abilities in Battle Armor and Lightning Rod, its viability is completely dependent on whether they hold the Thick Club. Without it, it is a very underwhelming Pokemon, but you can thief Wild Cubone to get a Thick Club anyway. In Kanto, you can repel Manip to guarantee yourself Ghastly in Pokemon Tower, making it possible to never see a Cubone until Victory Road. But if you mess up on repels, it's still useful for Koga's Muk, Giovanni, and Champion Blue's Rhydon if it pivots into Rock Tomb. Similarly, in Kalos, the only important battles that Marowak can see good use in is against Clement and maybe Wikstrom. As a Alolan Marowak, it gets an arguably more useful typing while getting more usefulness out of Lightning Rod, beating Totem Togedemaru and Vikavolt, Lusamine bar Milotic, some of Gladion, Molayne, and some of Kukui and Hao's teams at the end. Not too shabby, but remember, all this only if you have the Thick Club. I'd stay away from using regular Marowak, but Alolan Marowak is pretty good. Let me know which Pokemon you'd like to see evaluated for Nuzlocke viability. Glaceon is usually not available until relatively late in the games, with Eevee evolving in range of an Ice Rock. Even when you do manage to evolve Eevee into Glaceon, the regions are so hostile to its mono ice typing that I don't see a lot of reason to use it most of the time. In Platinum, it is only useful for Bertha and half of Cynthia's team, including Garchomp, which is valuable as a last-ditch answer. In X and Y, it only beats Drasna. Ugh. In Gen 7, you can only use it against Elite 4 members Acerola and Kahili. Generation 8 buffed it a little by adding the Ice Stone evolution method so Glaceon can be used a little more often, as well as adding Freeze Dry to his move pool, though it is still only usable after Gym 7, taking on half of Champion Leon's team. Finally, in Scarlet and Violet, it is usable to beat Titan Tatsugiri, Rika, Larry in the Elite 4, Hassel, and half of AI Sada's team. I think the only game I would consider using Glaceon is Scarlet and Violet. Otherwise, I wouldn't really recommend it. Let me know which Pokemon you'd like to see evaluated for Nuzlocke viability. In a region where there is a significant amount of water, Blaziken is unsurprisingly the worst starter in Hoenn. You can't even get Combusken before Gym 1 because of the level cap. The only gym that one might argue for Blaziken's usage is against Norman, but unfortunately the level cap is 31, so you still have Combusken. The second half of the game is so hilariously hostile to it that I wouldn't recommend it most of the time. The reason why I say most of the time, however, is because it does have a huge niche from beating Sydney and Glacia bar Walrein of the Elite 4, and finding use in any non-Emerald Hoenn game against some of Steven is very nice too. Otherwise, I'm not entirely sure I would want to pick Blaziken over Swampert, who is far more consistent. Even Mega Blaziken in the specific context of Oras, while kind of insane with speed boost, is outclassed by other Mega Pokemon like Manectric, Gyarados, and if you really want to be that guy, the free Lotties. Overall, I would not recommend Blaziken at all unless you really struggle with the Elite 4. Let me know which Pokemon you'd like to see evaluated for Nuzlocke viability. Infamously known as one of the worst starters of all time, Meganium's evolution line finds extremely limited usage in the Johto games. Chuck may seem good because of Poliwrath's bad type matchup and since Chikorita evolves into Meganium quicker than usual, but nope, sorry, the level cap prohibits that. I argue Meganium's only decent gym matchup is against Claire, but you have to be careful of one of the two Dragonairs that carry either ice or fire coverage depending on the game you're playing. Otherwise, it is surprisingly very good at weakening Claire's team, notably her Kingdra. The only niches that I can possibly think of for Meganium in the late game is as a bulky screen setter or a poison powder staller, as it has great bulk as well as other utility moves like Body Slam and Synthesis. It gets mildly more usage in the Kanto postgame, but by that point you have so many different answers to each gym. However, if you absolutely need to, you can use Meganium as a temporary stop to Red's Pikachu. Overall, if you want to play optimally, you absolutely do not pick Meganium at all. Let me know which Pokemon you'd like to see evaluated for Nuzlocke viability. Emboar cruises through the early game and parts of the late game in both Unova games. Early access to Flame Charge is a notable point in its favor, and in Black White 2 specifically, the Drift Veil move tutors allow it to learn some fantastic moves, like Fire Punch, Low Kick, and Superpower. Emboar also has great matchups into several gyms and Team Plasma, with Colress, Zinzalin, and the Shadow Triad being particularly good matchups. You do need to be careful of Clay, Marlin, the Dragon Gym, most of the Elite 4, Black White 1 Getsus, and Champion Iris though. Lots of them are formidable run killers with advantageous matchups against Emboar. Clay in particular, however, can be slightly cheesed in Black White 2 thanks to the Air Balloon, which you can get for free also in Drift Veil. Altogether, Emboar is a popular choice for Unova runs and is great on average, though it struggles in parts of the mid and late games. If you want my opinion on the best starter in Unova, leave a comment where you can let me know which Pokemon you'd like to see evaluated for Nuzlocke viability. Feraligatr is interesting in Johto. Unlike the other starters, Totodile evolves really early into its final stage at level 30, which is very notable for Chuck, Jasmine, and Price if you're playing with level caps. It also has access to Crunch, Superpower, and Swords Dance, which may make it a good offensive sweeper with Return or Waterfall. Maybe Surf if you have to use it though. Finally, Feraligatr has advantageous matchups against rival Silver, Will and Lance of the League, and Red's Charizard, Blastoise, and Lapras. However, it is outclassed by other water types like Lantern and Gyarados, the latter of which you can get basically all the time. Though I do think that Gyarados' overall worst matchups against Lance and Red are notable. In a vacuum, Typhlosion is probably the best starter of the three Johto starters, but I do think it is pretty reasonable to argue that Feraligatr may be the best starter in the context of Johto Nuzlocks, but it still faces competition from other water types, Gyarados in particular. So I'd say Feraligatr is pretty good. Let me know which Pokemon you'd like to see evaluated for Nuzlocke viability. Johto is almost completely devoid of good fire types that aren't locked behind the Kanto postgame, the other of which being Arcanine. Therefore, Typhlosion carves a niche in Johto runs for being probably the only fire type you will get in your run. It works really well with other encounters like Gyarados, Ampharos, and Quagsire. Additionally, it has pretty good matchups against some gyms, notably Bugsy, Price, and Jasmine. That's where the positives end for me though. Claire and Lance are disastrous matchups for Typhlosion, with some of the Elite Four not being much better. Typhlosion's move pool is also very lackluster, with Lava Plume and Flamethrower being its only useful moves for Johto. Eruption can be useful, but that isn't until way into the Kanto postgame. You can probably gather from what I've said that, in my opinion, Typhlosion is quite overrated. In a vacuum, it is probably the best Johto starter, but I am not analyzing these Pokemon in a vacuum. Though because it is part of an extremely rare type in Johto, it can carve a name for itself, especially in the early game. So Typhlosion is pretty good. Let me know which Pokemon you'd like to see evaluated for Nuzlocke viability. Yes, I am aware that Archeops is one of the worst abilities of all time in Defeatist. Archeops is also completely unobtainable in Black and White 2 runs. That's where the negatives end though, as despite those downfalls, I think Archeops is fucking insane. It is one of the only Pokemon with natural access to U-turn, and coming from a 140 attack stat and 110 speed, it along with its plethora of coverage moves is going to hurt. Its best move, Acrobatics, makes Archeops one of the few Pokemon that do not require an item, making it surprisingly consistent. While Archeops doesn't have many great matchups against the gyms in Elite Four, it checks some of Martial and Final End, but also very importantly, mows through the majority of late game trainer fights throughout the overworld. In sharp contrast to Black and White, Gen 7 sees Archeops having several great matchups, beating all of Team Skull, Lusamine, Elite Four Hala, Kahili, Barskarmory, Acerola, Barpalisan, and Hau. Archeops is amazing, but you have to play around that Defeatist ability. Revive that Plume Fossil at Nacrene or Alola Route 8, and you will not be disappointed. Let me know which Pokemon you'd like to see evaluated for Nuzlocke viability.